A forecast is not a prediction, it is a navigational framework because the future rarely unfolds exactly as expected. Inflation changes, interest rates move, income changes, expenses evolve, behavior adapts, which means a single forecast is never enough. Strong systems prepare for multiple futures. And in this video, we are going to use the household forecasting workbook that I've shown in other videos to begin stress testing the entire operating system. This is where forecasting evolves into adaptive financial engineering. Now, before we begin, let's clarify something important. The household scenario we are using in this episode is meant to represent a realistic middle-class Canadian household. Examples include employment income, rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, transportation, debt obligations, investments, and liquidity reserves. The specific numbers themselves are not the important part because your numbers will be different. Your income, expenses, liabilities, investments, and priorities may look completely different from this example. But the process remains exactly the same. Because forecasting is not about specific dollar amounts, forecasting is about understanding how variables behave through time. The system works the same whether income is $60,000, $120,000, or $300,000, because every household still contains income-driven variables, inflation-sensitive variables, schedule-driven liabilities, behavioral spending systems, and compounding structures. And once your statements are properly structured, the forecasting architecture becomes transferable to almost any household scenario. This is critically important because the goal is not memorizing one model. The goal is learning how to build adaptive financial systems for your own life. Scenario analysis exists because the future contains uncertainty, and uncertainty creates risk. But importantly, risk is not simply volatility. Risk is the possibility that the system becomes fragile. Scenario analysis allows us to identify where pressure accumulates, where liquidity deteriorates, where debt servicing becomes dangerous, and where optionality begins disappearing. This is critically important because most households only discover fragility after stress arrives. Strong systems identify fragility before stress arrives. We begin with the baseline forecast. This is the expected future under relatively stable conditions. For example, we may assume wage growth of 5%, inflation of 3%, stable employment, stable interest rates, and moderate investment returns. Under these assumptions, the system may show rising income, growing investments, declining liabilities, improving liquidity, and rising net worth. But this is only one possible future. And importantly, the baseline scenario creates the reference framework against which all other scenarios will be compared. Now we begin stress testing the system. Suppose inflation accelerates unexpectedly. Examples may include groceries increase 12%, utilities increase 10%, insurance increases 8%, fuel rises sharply, and wage growth lags behind inflation. Now the system begins changing because inflation-sensitive variables grow faster than income. This compresses contribution margin, savings capacity, liquidity growth, and future optionality. And importantly, the effects flow through every statement simultaneously. Expenses rise, net income falls, cash flow compresses, liquidity deteriorates, net worth growth slows. This is why inflation is so dangerous for structurally rigid systems. Now suppose interest rates rise materially. This immediately affects structured debt and revolving credit systems. Examples include lines of credit, variable rate debt, credit cards, refinanced loans. Because higher rates increase interest expense, and higher interest expense reduces net income, cash flow, contribution margin, and liquidity accumulation, importantly, the workbook structure already allows this to occur naturally because interest expense is connected directly to amortization schedules, debt balances, and revolving credit assumptions. This is where the interconnected forecasting system becomes extremely powerful because, as shown in other videos, you would just increase the interest rate associated with the particular credit facility, and that would show up in your journal, okay, your journal, which then transfers into your ledger, then works through to the trial balance, the adjusted trial balance, and your financial statements. Now we examine income shock. Suppose gross household income declines by 25%. This may occur because of job loss, reduced hours, illness, economic recession, or business slowdown. Now the system behaves very differently because some expenses decline naturally with income, but many others remain structurally fixed. Examples include rent, insurance, subscriptions, debt obligations, and financing costs. This is where lifestyle leverage becomes visible because structurally rigid systems experience much greater stress during income decline. And this is precisely why the contribution income statement is so important. Now we model adaptation because strong systems do not remain static. They reposition dynamically. Examples include reducing discretionary spending, eliminating subscriptions, downsizing transportation costs, refinancing debt, increasing income streams, delaying major purchases, increasing liquidity reserves. And now the system begins stabilizing again. This is critically important because resilience does not mean avoiding all stress. Resilience means the ability to adapt successfully. And this is where forecasting becomes strategic positioning. Most budgeting systems cannot do this because they are not integrated systems. But once the income statement, net worth statement, cash flow statement, and contribution statement become interconnected, the household operating system becomes fully dynamic. Now, small changes propagate through the entire structure. And that allows us to observe fragility, resilience, optionality, leverage, liquidity, and future positioning. This is where personal finance evolves into systems engineering. In the next episode, we begin exploring fragility itself, because some systems break under pressure, while others become stronger through adaptation. We will begin analyzing liquidity resilience, leverage fragility, operating rigidity, financial flexibility, and anti-fragile household structures. Because ultimately the goal is not merely survival, the goal is building systems capable of adapting, recovering, and strengthening through uncertainty.